if you have information about the system being pumped and you know who the pumper was, put that there, because a lot of times the pumper has other information about the system that nobody else knows about. Secondary treatment, that's going to be an aerator or a filter bed. And for size, if you know it's a 500 gallon per day aerator because you have the records, you can put that in. Filter bed size would be in square foot. And then if it is an aerator, like Todd said, we're going to start making sure everyone has a service contract. So if you can find out if there is a service contract already on the aerator, or if not, probably run and write that in the comments. Dispersal type, I probably missed some, so I think I have an other there. You can, if there's something strange. Otherwise, just check which or whatever it is, and then you can write in the square foot or foot or circle it or whatever. Then the other devices, I think we're kind of skipping over lift stations, and it sort of needs to be addressed, because a lot of times if you're doing it, depending on how the lift station's set up, if you're doing a flow test, if you don't run enough water to cycle the lift station, it might not ever even get out to the leach field. So mark that there's a lift station. If you can figure out how many gallons it's pumping per time, make sure you're getting into the lift station so that you see that it's pumping. And upflow filter, if there's a jet, there's a diversion box, a multi-zone valve, or any type of drain. I think we kind of missed that on the last form, so hopefully that'll help complete it a little more.
Laura, I'm not sure if you're going to address this or not, but one issue on the lift station that we wanted to, were you going to talk about that later?
Go ahead.
Okay. The lift station, you know, the old system's no big deal. Lift station, you get it from the low point at point A to the high point at point B. No big deal. If you're looking at a newer system, which, you know, we haven't seen much yet, but I know there's going to be more and more that will be reviewed. Mounds and LPP and maybe flood dosing. If we just set mounds and LPP aside a little bit, they're a whole different animal. And if you're not accustomed to it, you need to learn about them. For example, when you inspect an LPP, which actually a mound has LPP in it, that's low pressure pipe. That's basically, you're going to pressurize a small diameter pipe and it comes out small holes. You need to be able to do a pressure test at the end, or a head test at the end. If you can't do that, you may want to pass the work along, because that is the right way to do that inspection. Because when that system went in the ground, it had a certain flow rate and a certain head that it was designed for. If you don't do that, you won't know if it's operating properly or not. You might not see ponding, and that's good. But if it was designed at 3.5 feet and it's producing 1 foot, there's some issues. There's a pipe break, there's something else going on there. So if you're not accustomed to seeing that, you definitely want to learn about it. You actually probably will need some additional equipment to actually do that kind of test. So if it's a newer system, you know, this just brings it up because every one of those has a lift tank if you're on LPP. Just be very cautious of it. And if we see it's a mound and there hasn't been a flow test or something done on it, we'll say the form is deficient. It'll have to be redone. So.
Yeah, to add to that, and I haven't had any mounds that I can remember yet, but you want to make sure you get into the control panel and put down the event counter, so we can get an idea, because when we final them, we have what the event counter is, so we can calculate back and see what it's been doing over the last few years or whatever. Second page, first half of the second page, the color of dye used. That helps us when we go back out to double check you guys. We know what we're looking for. If you use more than one color, if you're using red for the sink because you don't know if it's going in the tank or not, just put that on there and label which one you're using. So if we see red, we know it's for the kitchen sink and it's not a complete failure of a system. Try not to use blue or purple. It's really hard to see. And I don't understand why they make them. Let's see. Access to septic tank. I think there's been a little confusion over that. I'm taking that as you can see in the tank during the inspection. So if you mark no under access to septic tank, I'm going to require that the tank be opened and have a re-inspection. So if whether there's a riser there or not, if you're in the tank, mark yes. You can put in the comments that there needs to be risers. Outlet T-baffle inspected. A lot of people aren't filling in a reason. So you go ahead and put that it was too deep, or the tank was too full, or you just couldn't see. The leach trench bed depth and the effluent level in trenches. I know that it's hard to find the leach lines sometimes, and the ground's hard sometimes, but you really need to be probing. So try harder to do that. I know a lot of them that are coming in are not probed. At least it's marked not probed, so make sure you fill out what the depth is if you find the leach lines. And if you can feel, if they're wet, or see if they're wet on your probe, make sure that you mark that. I know you can't always find them, but I think some people have been skipping over that. I got this from Summit County. The water level before you start your hydraulic loading in the septic tank. So before you flush the dye and start running water, you want to go out to the tank and you want to measure from wherever you want, but you can put on there like from the top of the riser down to the water level. It's 24 inches. Then when you're done running all your water, you want to measure it again, and if the water levels come up, that tells us that there's an issue. So that's something new. The volume of water used during the hydraulic loading, and everybody knows how much they're supposed to be running, but that's a guideline, a minimum. I mean, we don't want to force failures necessarily, but if there's something suspicious, by all means, run more water, because we don't want to pass something and then 2 months later find out that it's failing. Observable effluent in observable effluent discharge. That means if you find the dye somewhere, if you find the dye going to the ditch. I think some people were thinking we saw it in the box. Okay, yeah, but if you mark anything there, I'm assuming the system's surfacing or failing. And then the location of the discharge, you want to fill out, where you saw the dye or the effluent. I changed around the plumbing questions a little bit because they had been confusing from the beginning. Black water, the toilet routed into the septic, gray water, sinks, laundry, and then if there's a water softener present, yes or no, and then the discharge location of the water softener. The second half is the same, except there's a lot more comments section, so you guys can write me a big long story about what happened out there. Third page, we added in, does not appear to be functioning properly and needs further evaluation. So you can use that at your discretion if you think there's an issue, you need us to go out and look at it, or you're just a little suspicious of it. But it's not obviously failing, you can mark that. Everything else is the same. But make sure you're marking one of those 4 along the side. I know sometimes, and you can overlook it, or sometimes it's facts and I can't read it, but you need to mark one of them there, because if you just mark the comments, I'm a little confused on it, just to make sure that it's okay or not.
I wanted to give an example of the does not appear to be functioning properly, needs further evaluation. I think we had one here recently that's a pretty good example of that. We had a property, I think it's in Nivishillen Township, older house, early 1900s, something like that was built. First thing you notice when you do the inspection is 2 crocks, old system. You walk out back, now this thing was dye tested, but it was vacant. You walk out back and you don't see really where the leaching can go, so you kind of walk the general direction down the hill, and you start looking toward the swamp, which is probably 300-400 feet away, or maybe better. Start looking that direction. Lo and behold, what you see is little potholes in a straight line from an old tile that's collapsed all the way. It's probably every 30 to 50 feet you see these collapses all the way. No dye at the creek, but Highly suspicious. Well, who thinks that's highly suspicious? Yeah. So you can't get any dye out the creek, but it certainly needs further evaluation. I would hate to say that's passing simply because dye only is not the only reason a system passes or fails. If you see something suspicious, you probably ought to report that. Probably in a case like that, whether it be cameraing or sometimes we can put a smoke machine on that and we start smoking that line, and you're going to see that smoke wafting up out of all those collapses, at least for a certain distance. So things like that can be done to further evaluate that system. But that's a good example of when you want to use that. That's also a good example. Laura talked about forcing failure. We don't want to force failure. If you've got a leach line system, you're sure of it, and you run the 180 or whatever the gallons is that you're supposed to run, one thing we don't want to be accused of, because we've been accused of it, is putting so much water that it starts to bubble up. What you can write is needs further evaluation or it's questionable. You can just honestly say, it doesn't look good, but it passed. And that's fine. Let the buyer and owner negotiate what's going to happen. So we've seen that before. We've run water, the trenches are getting completely full of water, and you think, man, 5 more gallons and it's up, man. Be careful. We don't want to be accused of something. But on the other hand, if you see something like that, and it's 400 feet to the creek, and you have a suspicion that it just takes 5 more gallons to get the dye out, then in that case, use your judgment. So just be careful how you approach that. But that's a time when maybe a little more water would be prudent. It's vacant. I mean, you got to fill that pipe, or that pipe could be surrounded by gravel and it's just leaching out the whole way. Use your judgment.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to use that box, but don't overuse it, because that's going to run us around constantly, because we're going to be going out to all of them. So if there's anything suspicious, definitely mark that box. The second half of the third page is just your signature. There's a couple more comment lines that I cut out. But then this is the new part. We're actually going to fill out a whole nother sheet like Summit County does over reviewing this inspection. So that's just marked at the bottom. This is hard to see, but I added something and it's shrunk down. You have more space to draw, but we added a table that you can write your distances in, so it doesn't have to make the drawing so busy. And I'll just read it to you here. Primary treatment to foundation distance, primary treatment to disposal, primary treatment to water source, primary treatment to property line, disposal to foundation, dispersal, well, I should be disposal, whatever, to water source and to property line. And then distances of water source to foundation and water source to property line. That's the closest distance. I know you can mark whatever, you could put a lot of different distances in there, but you want to mark the closest distance to foundation from the well or whatever for all of those. The other thing that you can do, and some people have done it, and sometimes it doesn't matter, but you can mark in trees on your drawing. There's a big tree right beside the septic tank. And then, let's see. And these are just minimum distances. You can add more distances, from the corner of the house to the tank or to the box, something like that. So we have good documentation on what's there. Okay, here's the first half of the certificate of review. The biggie there is the evaluation is deficient. So make sure it's filled out completely so we don't have to return them. If it's deficient, we'll mark yes and then send it back. Once we get it back in, we're going to use the same form and write the resubmission date. The middle section of the form, it's pretty much the same as you guys got to check. The unacceptable minor issues, that's going to be used if there's, a broken line or a box replacement, something like that. And then further health department recommendation, we're going to use that for T's. So we're not going to go back out and knock heads together if there's T's missing, but we're going to recommend that there's T's, recommend that there's risers. And then if it requires a service contract or not, we just want to make sure that it gets through to the buyer that you need to have this or don't.